Well, in this video, we start moving more into Microsoft Excel to show you how to do descriptive stats, which are building graphs, calculating summary statistics. And I'm going to start with a fairly advanced technique because once you know how to use them and aware that they exist, pivot tables are an incredibly powerful way to collapse structured data or database data into information very quickly. So let's first go over pivot tables. So I'm going to go to that spreadsheet that we have. This is my credit card transaction data, and I added another row so that my database is separate from what we did earlier in terms of classification of the type of data. Remember, the type of data, when all we can do is count it, we can measure it and calculate additional statistics if it's real numbers or interval data. But here is a database. It's got 400 records. It's got a header, so 401 rows total, and it's got, I think, 10 fields. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 fields. It's a database. It's a small one, but it is. So I'm going to put my cursor over in my database, and then I'm going to go under Insert, Pivot Table. Now, different versions of Excel may change where this is, but that's where it is on this particular version of Excel. And you hit Pivot Table or select it, and it prompts you. It says Select a table or range, and because I had my cursor or I had a cell activated, it grabbed the entire database, and so it looked for non-empty cells in a table format. So you can see it correctly grabbed starting in cell A3 all the way down to J403. Now I could overwrite that, and I will. You normally don't have to do this, but I could go and say, well, it's this, and then scroll all the way down. And that's the database, which happens to be what we just did. But you could, if Excel doesn't guess correctly, you could override that. And then the next thing it asks you is, where do you want your pivot table to exist? And the default, and probably the best way to do it, is to let it generate a new worksheet. So when I hit OK, it's going to add a new worksheet. And it's very abstract looking. It's a little bit intimidating. You don't have anything there in terms of information, but over on the right side of the spreadsheet is where you construct the pivot table, and what's built is over here. So what we want to start with, and if you notice, these are all of the fields. So there were 10 fields, so these are the 10 fields. And what we want to start with, let's look at a frequency table. Now, a frequency table is just a count. Repeat, it's just a count in certain categories. So, and we want to come up with how many times did this particular event occur. So back to my spreadsheet, and remember it's credit card transactions, and I wanted to look at how many transactions occurred by region. So I'm going to pull my region over into the rows area. And look what happens. It starts building a table, and immediately we know that there are 4 regions, that's it, in the entire database. Well, how many transactions of those 400 occurred in the Midwest, Northeast, South, or Southwest? I'm going to go back to the database. This is the region. And you can see West occurred 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If I count all the West, that would tell me how many West transactions occurred, but I don't want to have to manually do that. That's what this pivot table will do. So the first thing we do is grab an identifier, so we now know that we've cut our data by region. Now I want over in the values to count. So how do I do that? I'm going to pull that same field, left click, drag it over into values. Now that cell, the cells in that column are just text. They're either Midwest, Northeast, South, or West. So all it can do is count. And that's what it does. You see over here it says count of region. So just like that, I know that there were 71 transactions from the Midwest, 115 in the Northeast, 93 in the South, 121 in the West, a total of 400, which is what the total number. I can build a picture of this by going to the Analyze Pivot Chart, and I'll just let it grab. That is a column chart, and just like that, this is my frequency table. This is a table. This is a chart. Frequency table, it's a count of the frequencies. This is a chart of that data. It doesn't have to be a column chart. We could, if we wanted to, if we thought it was worthwhile, we could put together other graphs. I don't know if this is a value, but we can at least look at it in a pie chart. I may not want region, or let's go back to the value. So I grabbed region here, it cut the data, and then I dropped region here and it counted. Now remember these numbers, 71, 115, 93, 121. I'm going to pull this out and I'm going to grab another field and pull it over. And again, card type is just either elect mart or other. So what is it going to do? It's going to count. But notice what happens. You get the exact same numbers because, again, all it's doing is cutting the data by region. So it's saying how many Midwest transactions. It's not asking me to cut by card type. It's just counting. So there were 71 card type occurs that were out of the Midwest. Now, if I wanted to be real clever, let me go back and delete this table, this chart. And notice what happens when my cursor is not in the pivot table, then I don't see the construction, the ability to construct the pivot table. I click back and there it is. What if I wanted to also cut this by card type? So just like that, I can say there were 17 transactions in the Midwest where they used the Elect Mart credit card, and only in 54 where they used some other credit card. And there's the total. And I could build a graph of this. And just like that, it does it automatically. Where the red is the other, the blue is the Elect Mart, and the 4 across the bottom are the different regions. So this is how we can build frequency tables, column charts, pie charts for nominal data. So we're able very quickly to be able to use pivot tables to generate results for nominal data. Now before we go any further and go into time series or scatter plots, let me show you something. What if your data is not nominal but is a number? So I'm going to go back to that spreadsheet, delete this, and I'm going to pull the count out, and I'm going to drop in one of these other fields into this value sheet that is a number. Items ordered is a number. Items ordered is a number. So what happens when I drop items ordered into this? If Excel recognizes it as a number, then the default is that it adds, it sums. So see what happens? And you're getting the sum of the items ordered. So because this is a number, it's not just counting, it's summing those values. So how you would interpret this is that in the Midwest, using a credit card, Elect Mart, a total of 63 items, total number of items were ordered. Now keep in mind, this doesn't total to 400 anymore because it's the number of items ordered. If I pull this out and bring in a total cost, this is the total dollars transacted from the Midwest using the Elect Mart. The total dollars transacted was $3,212.73. Obviously, this doesn't total to 400. Now, I can always go change the modifier. I don't have to sum. I could use some other. I can go to Value Field Settings. This is our left clicks. Left click here, go to Value Field Settings. It is right now summing. I can go back to count. And there's my original information. That's what we had at the very beginning. So I can always go convert my data to counts, But when the data is interval data, if it's really numbers, Excel's default is that it sums. And again, you don't have to sum if it's a real number. You can count it. You can do more sophisticated things. You can take the average. You can take the max, the min. You can calculate measures of variability. We'll talk about this later. So you have a lot of power with pivot tables. You can quickly turn data into information with pivot tables. Okay, let's keep moving on. Let's go back to a time series. This is data structured by time, where time is on the x-axis, and what you're wanting to look at, generally a forecast or things that happened over time, and we can use a line chart to do that. So I'm going to go back. We're not going to use pivot tables in this case. You probably could, but I'm going to just go back to the credit card transactions, and look what I'm going to do. I'm going to left click and drag over my time series. This is time slices. This is a March 6th, and there's a whole bunch of them. And March 7th, I'm going to drag that all the way down for all 400 records. You don't have to get all 400, but I am. And then let's say I want to plot the dollar spent. So I want to plot as a function of time, which is in column A, column I. How can I grab this data and this data? So right now I'm not touching my keyboard, I'm not touching anything. I've already highlighted cells A3 through the bottom of that. And now I'm going to hold the Control Shift, and then left click. That's wrong. Let me do it again. I highlight, I'm left clicking and dragging. Then I'm just holding the Control button, not the Shift button, but the Control, and then I'm going to highlight, and look what it does. It's keeping the data in my original selection, and I'm adding to. So I'm holding the Control button down on the keyboard, left clicking, dragging down, and so it's letting me grab non-contiguous data that's not attached. These are the same dimensions. They're both 401 records or 401 rows, including the header. And now I'm going to go in Excel. These aren't pivot tables. I'm going to go to Insert, hover over this, which is a line chart. And I'm going to get the one with the dots. And there you go. This is looking at my cost by time slice. So, and I can make it really big. So I can look for a specific day. And I can see that on April 30th, $390 was purchased. So that's a time series, and I developed the time series with the line chart and using Control, left clicking to grab data that's not contiguous. The last thing I'm going to look at is a scatter plot. A scatter plot is similar to a line chart, but in this case, and we could have used a scatter plot, but think of a scatter plot as it doesn't have to be a time series. But if we have two columns of data that have real numbers, interval variables, real numbers, can we plot those? We want to plot one against the other. So a scatter plot is also called an XY chart. The X is the X-axis, the Y is the Y-axis. We'll go back to Excel. I'm going to go to the 1976 data. And what I want to plot is the number of wins as a result of how many, let's plot it as a function of opponent rush yards. So I'm going to plot the number of wins against how well my defense did against the run. So to do that, I'm going to do a little data manipulation to make it easier to show. I'm going to, over here, I'm going to grab, first of all, I'm going to grab this data. So I'm left clicking, dragging down, and then right click within, when I got my cursor within the selection and say copy. I'm going to go over to column L and do a paste, right click, paste. So there's the data I just did. It's the same data, it's just duplicated. And then I'm going to grab games 1. Same dimensions, right click, copy, go over into column or a cell M1 and do a paste. Again, I'm right-clicking. When I'm highlight, I right-click is to get that. And now I've got my data. My opponent rush yards will be my X data. It's going to be plotted on the, and I'm going to make this column wider. So if you notice, when I hover, put my cursor right between, I can either left-click and make that wider, or I could have double-clicked and it would auto-size. And I'm going to do the same thing for column N and make that wider. So I'm going to call my rush yards my X, and it's going to be plotted on a horizontal axis, and my games won is going to be my Y, which is going to be plotted on a vertical axis. And sort of what I'm saying is that my Y is a function of my X. My X is what I control, or is my independent variable, and Y is the result, or the dependent variable. And so if I grab these, again, notice they're the same dimensions, the same number of rows, and go up to Insert. Now I'm going to go to this, and if you note, if I hover over that, let me do it again. If I hover over this, it's called a scatter, or it's also called an XY chart. A scatter plot and an XY chart are the same thing. I left-click on it, and I'm going to get the ones that aren't attached. I'm just going to get the one with the dots. So there you go. This is a scatter plot. This is a plot where I plotted my rushing yards allowed on the x-axis and then the number of wins. And you can hopefully see some type of pattern. You can sort of see that when the rushing yards are high, the number of wins are low, and when the rushing yards are lower, closer to between 1,500 and 2,000, the number of wins is higher. So we actually have an inverse relationship, whereas our defense gets better and we allow fewer yards, we win more games. Okay, so what I've done, what we've just to review, we're using Excel to do graphs. And we've covered pivot tables, and we can use those to build frequency tables, bar charts, pie charts. We also looked at developing line charts and scatter plots. Thanks.